ghost story mystery. Hallows House. This part is called The Attic. We found ourselves in the grand drawing room of the old hall. Bert had taken the covers off a large overstuffed velvet sofa and insisted we sit down. He lit some of the candles that sat in gold-plated sconces around the walls. The light produced from the tiny dancing flames filled the room with a comforting glow. Next, he placed 2 candles on the low table in front of us, lit them, and then pulled up an elaborately carved dining chair and sat down. "I know I keep saying it, but I am sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to frighten either of you. I thought you were burglars, breaking in like. I've had some trouble with the local kids recently." "I suppose we did kind of break in," added Rachel under her breath. "No, we actually broke in," I said, turning to her. "But no need for apologies, Bert. We're fine. Now." I grabbed Rachel's hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She gave me a smile in return. "I see you found our crowbar," I said to Bert, pointing to the long rusty metal object at his feet. He nodded and nudged the crowbar with his foot. "It was lying outside on the stone patio next to the back doors that you, broke into," he replied awkwardly. "You see, I was walking home through the graveyard. I saw some lights in this direction, and after that I heard a loud crash, which is why I came across to find out what was going on." "Yes, that was us," I said, looking at my feet. "You were walking through the graveyard," said Rachel, incredulously. "In the dark." "It's not that peculiar, young lady," he said. "You were breaking into someone else's property in the dark." Rachel and I glanced at each other. We couldn't argue with that. "What I don't understand, though," he said, shaking his head, "if you'd wanted to take a look around the old place, why didn't you ask me? I have the keys." As a demonstration, he rummaged in the pocket of his overcoat and pulled out a number of iron keys on a leather strap and jingled them in front of us. "We didn't know that," said Rachel, aghast. "You didn't say anything about having keys to the place when you were at our house the other day." "Didn't I?" he said, in genuine surprise. "But I'm the caretaker. Well, a kind of caretaker, I suppose. B left the keys to me before she was taken into the care home, and made me promise that I'd keep the place in good order, as she had. I come here every other day just about and tidy around, do any small repairs." "Which is why everything looks so well taken care of," I said, glancing at Rachel. "At least on the inside," I added. A pained expression appeared on Bert's face. "I do the best I can," he said defensively. "There's no money to fix the leaking roof, the damp and the rotten window frames. But I imagine the London gent will probably see to all that very soon." "The London gent?" asked Rachel in surprise. "Yes," said Bert. "The new owner of this place." "New owner?" said Rachel. "Hold on, I'm confused. If Beatrice Scullion left the keys to you, doesn't that make seaside town. Rachel shook her head, shivered and hugged herself. I don't know. All these connections are getting weirder by the second. Maybe he needs a holiday home. I put my arm around her shoulder. Are you cold, love? I have some tea, I said to her, reaching inside my coat and producing a small tartan-coloured thermos flask. Rachel looked at me in disbelief. You have a flask of tea? You're not the only one who can produce something useful out of her overcoat, I said, grinning. I don't suppose you have any more of that wonderful Bakewell tart stashed away in there too, do you? Said Bert, hopefully. No, I answered. Not enough pockets in this coat for cake as well, although I do have a couple of boiled sweets. Bert looked disappointed. I poured some of the steaming hot tea into the small plastic lid of the flask and handed it to Rachel. She accepted it gratefully, took a few sips, and passed the cup back to me. I took a mouthful myself and then handed it across the table to Bert. While he was finishing off the rest of the tea in the cup, Rachel stood up and began walking around the room. She stopped every now and then to lift up a corner of one of the large sheets covering some of the furniture so that she could inspect what was underneath. Suddenly she stopped and stared over at Bert. Is this the room where Elizabeth Pike was murdered? She asked. Bert seemed taken aback by the unexpected question. He stammered. Before he'd managed an answer, Rachel continued, because if this is the drawing room, then it must be. I placed my hand down on the velvet couch where I was sitting and grimaced. I don't suppose this is where I began. The deceased was found slumped upon a sofa with a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, said Rachel slowly, quoting the newspaper report we'd read only days ago. She briefly stroked a corner of the sofa with her hand, and then suddenly began making her way to the drawing room door. Turning towards us, she said, I need to go back to the attic. Now. Rachel took the lead, as she had done earlier, and Bert and I followed her back up the 3 flights of stairs to the top floor of the house, albeit with less haste. The door to the small attic staircase was still ajar as we'd left it. I could hear Bert breathing heavily behind me with the exertion of the staircase climb. I don't understand, he panted. How did you get that door open? It wasn't locked, I said. That doesn't make sense, he said. Nobody has been up in that attic for years. The key was lost. He jangled his bunch of iron keys in front of us again to make his point. It's the one door I couldn't open banister. Bert was beginning his ascent behind me. After all the stairs we'd just walked up, I hoped that he was going to be able to manage the climb. Then, just as I was starting to wonder how far we were going to have to go before we reached the top, the staircase ended abruptly. I was faced with another wooden door, which Rachel must have already opened and entered. I stepped out into a small octagonal-shaped turret room. Moonlight flooded through the room's narrow windows, creating greyish-blue striped shadows on the old wooden floorboards. I could see Rachel standing straight ahead of me in another open doorway. She was staring at me. "In here," she said. Bert reached the top of the staircase. He was breathing heavily with the extra exertion. "Well, I never," he exclaimed amidst deep breaths of gulped air. "In all my years, I've never been in this part of the house." "Well, somebody has," said Rachel, beckoning us towards the open doorway. The three of us entered, and Bert and I watched as Rachel made her way over to the corner of the empty rectangular-shaped room. She picked up an old oil lamp that was sitting on the sill of a large leaded window. It was lit and gave off an eerie yellow glow. "What do you make of this?" she said, holding it up for our inspection. "Bloomin' kids," said Bert. "How did they get up here?" "No," said Rachel, shaking her head. "Not kids. This lamp is responsible for the light I've been seeing through my bedroom window, night after night." She put the lamp back down on the sill and started peering through the dirty glass of the window, rubbing at it with her glove so she could see better. I went over to her and peered through the window myself. There, in the distance, I could make out the back of our house through the trees. I could see Rachel's bedroom window, and below that, the wall of our garden. I could even make out parts of the courtyard garden with statues in it that we'd discovered yesterday evening. Bert joined us, picked up the lamp, and began to inspect it. "You know that kids aren't responsible for this," said Rachel to Bert. "You used to see this light yourself when you were a child from your own bedroom window. You saw the blue lady too." Bert looked stunned at Rachel's suggestion. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Nobody knows that." He looked at me. "How does she know that?" I was chatting with your brother yesterday," I answered, awkwardly. "Our Stan," exclaimed Bert. "He can't keep anything to himself." "But he wasn't the only one who knew," said Rachel. "Mern de Aldeville also saw strange things. She was your childhood friend, wasn't she?" "You've been speaking to Mern too," said Bert. He placed the lamp back down on the windowsill. "Nobody believed us," he said, turning slowly to look at us both. "Neither my parents nor hers, nor my brother Stan, I might add. He teased me about it relentlessly. what about all the other strange coincidences? She said quickly. Who would have guessed that we were related to the Oldville family? What drew you to buying part of the former Hallows house? We are connected in some way to all of this. It's not a coincidence. It can't be. But that doesn't mean that the explanation has to be paranormal, I said. Before she had time to answer, Bert piped in. You are related to the Oldvilles, he said. I knew it. When did you find out? Oh, today, this afternoon, I answered, somewhat flustered. Suddenly Rachel grabbed my arm. Mum, she said, lift the lamp back into that position again. What position? I said. You just raised it up and I saw a weird shape on the floor. I hadn't even realised that I'd moved the lamp. Like this, I said, as I lifted the lamp to the level of my chin.